All right, everybody, we are back at Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I'm welcoming back my good friend, Alexis Saenz. How you doing, Alexis?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Today, our topic is going to be Thankstaking, and I'd actually like you to do the introduction if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement that I wrote with a Tongva relative, mentor, Tina Calderon. So yeah, I'm going to read that now. We honor the ancestors of the village of Yangna, now called Los Angeles. We honor their living descendants, the people of Tomangar. The Tongva people are still here today and are thriving. We honor them past, present, and future as they have been many generations surviving settler colonization, land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. Their resilience lives. They are the stewards of the land. They are a part of our vibrant community. We are grateful for their teachings of respecting the lands, waters, elements, animals, and all life. We are grateful for their knowledge keepers and elders who have passed down many teachings. We are taught reciprocity by Mother Earth, but these communities are the ones that hold the heart of the land in their hands. To know them is to know the land. No matter where you go, honor the first people of the lands that you are with, because they have been here and will always be here. May we continue to build relations with each other in good ways by being a good relative while keeping in mind that reciprocity.
That's great. Thank you. And I want to say, just to be clear for everybody out there, I think what we really want to do today, because you and I talked about this before, is define what a lot of people in America think Thanksgiving is about. And then you clarify what that definition means to you and possibly other Native Americans. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, and we I mean, it's Native people to Americas, but it's also like we use the word indigenous now to just recognize all indigenous peoples of all the lands. But it is. So
you're also saying indigenous people all over the world that were native to their lands.
Yes, but it's also like for Thankstaking specifically to natives here. So some people prefer to be called natives. Older generations sometimes like still call themselves Indians. It just depends on who you're talking to. Right. But mostly nowadays, most people will say either native or indigenous.
That makes sense. Right. And I think you're right. A good friend of mine just made a documentary on this topic, and he found as he went around the country, people did want to be addressed as different things, and that's fine. And I looked up the definition for Thanksgiving.
Oh, boy.
And I just want to, I think we need to clarify this, right? I think a lot of people don't think about this at all.
Yes.
Right?
I think before getting into that definition, I would just personally like to say that I'm mixed. So my mom is white, my dad is where I get my indigenous roots from, which are Native American and indigenous from Mexico. So I am very mixed. And while I am indigenous and descendant, I also, have been within community and have learned a lot and have been decolonizing for a while now. But I am not the indigenous voice. I am not... I don't know everything. I'm still learning, and I just want to make that very known. And I'm still learning things to this day. And even after listening to this podcast, I'm sure I'll be like, oh my gosh, I should have said this,
This is a very friendly thing, and this is why we're talking about it, to clarify for people. And by the way, what is that I've been in community? What does that exactly mean to you?
I've been immersed within the indigenous community. I've gone to ceremonies.
And that's here in California?
It's across the U.S. I've been going to ceremony on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota for over 10 years. I have been immersed within the indigenous community within Denver and Colorado, and just meeting people from different indigenous communities, doing work in nonprofits, indigenous-led nonprofits. And so I have been within different indigenous communities, both urban and on the reservation in Rosebud. So
And what originally led you to find out more about your indigenous ancestry?
Yeah, so for me personally, I actually was invited to a Sundance ceremony on the Rosebud Reservation back when I was, I believe, 21. I'm now 32.
Okay.
And so I went, and it changed my life, and I just continued to go every year. It's a ceremony where you have to be invited to.
Yeah.
And
how did you get invited?
My friend from middle school invited me. His dad is a Sundance chief.
Okay.
And so they invited me as a family, and I went with them for a while. And then about 5 years ago, during ceremony, a Dene family, Navajo family, adopted me, and I've been going with them as well. So, and
how did you feel when that happened? Did you feel like you were home?
Oh my God. It was very wild for me. I knew the amount of weight that was held on it to be asked for someone to want to adopt you. It felt like so much significance in being adopted by another family. And I felt the weight of what that meant in that moment. And it just meant so much to be. They saw the way I was in ceremony, and that's what ultimately made them want to come up and talk to me and adopt me, because of the way I was moving through ceremony. So
you must have felt an inherent connection with them that just felt natural, right?
I mean, it was kind of crazy. I mean, they just tapped me on the shoulder, and they told me that they, wanted to adopt me as their daughter, and that they were watching how I was doing ceremony and stuff, and they really appreciated it, and because their son was out there, my brother. It was very magical, and they've taught me a lot within the last few years, just as
it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah, and just as the previous family I was going with, they taught me so much, and so did this new family, and it's been amazing. And then that's what made my dad want to get more into our roots, and he bought everyone in our family DNA tests.
So wait, your effort led to your father becoming more interested, right?
Yes, yeah, and he still wants to go with me to ceremony at some point.
That's great.
Which I hope happens, to go as like a whole family, and also bring my sibling with us too. But that's hopefully will happen soon. But all of this to say is that's kind of been my journey in being immersed into, although these tribes are not necessarily my tribes, like the Rosebud Reservation is Oglala Lakota. I am not Lakota, and my grandmother, we know that it was passed down that we were Dene or Navajo, but I don't have proof of that, so I don't claim that. And me and my sibling have been hiring genealogists and trying to find the church records and stuff to prove that, because
that's a great point. I think going back, a lot of people search for the churches because they're the only people that took records back then, right?
But even them, they went and burned those records, which we're going to get into. Right. But it's like, it's very hard to trace back and to prove that this great Aunt Anastasia is... it says in the church that they were Navajo Dene in Spanish, because the church back then was Spanish, because it was from Spain, and like them.
This is a complex journey.
Oh yeah. So it takes a lot to do this, to go and dive back into history, and a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we're still looking and searching for sure. But just that kind of full circle moment of like those words being passed down, and then like getting adopted by a Dene family. I don't think that anything, and being invited just to that ceremony, I don't think anything is coincidence. Like I was brought to that circle for a reason, Yeah. But this is not about me, this podcast. So I want to make sure that is kind of my journey, but that's what I mean by being in community. Not only that, but doing the work on the ground in grassroots movements, what they did at Standing Rock and keeping that fire going, with the organization that I was with, and moving through different other indigenous organizations too throughout this time, the last few years. It's been amazing to work with these communities and help in some small way. These communities are thriving still, and the fact that people just still don't know the true history is baffling, which is why we're doing this podcast.
Well, and I think this is good context. I mean, we're in United States of America. Nobody's 100% anything. Everybody is mixed. And for your background, the indigenous part, you're right. A lot of the records were destroyed, and it's going to be quite a journey to try to uncover all that stuff. It's not going to be easy. It's going to come down to genetics and talking to people and looking through records. And
it goes back to the United States government and their want to kill the Indian, save the man.
Right.
And
does this have to do with when they would take the children from the families and put them in schools and have them relearn what their new reality was forced to be?
Yeah, the boarding schools,
right.
Which is a whole other, you could go into that so deeply. It's so horrible and so sad when you start to learn those stories.
Right.
It just is unbearable. You can't.
It's hard to comprehend and emotional and a really difficult thing to get to.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, let me read this definition I found of Thanksgiving. It says it's an annual national holiday marked by religious observances and traditional meal, including turkey. The holiday commemorates a harvest festival celebrated by the Pilgrims in 1621 and is held in the U.S. on the fourth Thursday in November. How does that sound to you in the context of everything we've said? And you and I know each other well, and obviously that sounds ridiculous to us, but I still think there's a lot of other people that think that's the truth. If you're like me, 54 years old, that's what they taught us in school. And unfortunately, a lot of people just blindly believed it. So how do you feel, and what's your response when you hear a definition like that?
It's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's definitely giving colonizer energy, and I feel like even with people that want to celebrate Thanksgiving or Friendsgivings or any sort of celebration on this holiday, it's a day of mourning for Native people or Indigenous people. And I think that the lack of acknowledgement of genocide, disease, all those things I named in the land acknowledgement, the lack of acknowledgement of that is what has caused so much harm and has made this holiday into such a gluttony day of even the extraction of resources of the harvest season and what indigenous people taught to the settlers when they came over here of the harvest and how to live off the land. That's literally what, the food some of the food that's included, those are indigenous ways and practices and resources that were extracted from them. So it's the fact that you still want to celebrate a holiday that continues to harm and extract from indigenous cultures and teachings, it kind of baffles me that people still want to do that.
It sounds to me it's almost like triggering trauma, but on a massive scale.
Absolutely. I want to quote Dr. Kelly Motzler. They are from the Potawatomi tribe, and they said a lot of people don't acknowledge it as Thanksgiving. They say, I'm going to get together with my family and it's going to be about sharing a meal. But we're not going to acknowledge the Mayflower and the Pilgrims because it's holding up this false moment of friendship and completely disregards the genocide and the mass land theft and brutality that Native peoples experience. And that's the end of the quote. But I feel like to not even acknowledge history is absolutely insane.
We are living in a time right now where lots of places in the world are disregarding what truly happened for other people's gains and privilege.
Right. And another thing I want to say about Thanksgiving is that it wasn't an official United States holiday until November 1863, which was during the Civil War.
Right.
It was President Abraham Lincoln in his idea of a way to improve relations between northern and southern states, as well as tribal nations
Right.
around the U.S. That was like his way of like trying to do that, which is absolutely unhinged and insane, because the year before in December was the Dakota War of 1862, where there was a mass execution that took place of the Dakota tribal members, and corrupt federal agents kept the Dakota Sioux from receiving foods and provisions, which finally led to the brink of their starvation. But then members of the tribe fought back, and then Lincoln ordered the 38 Dakota men to die from hanging. And so that's a day that a lot of folks, indigenous folks, recognize as the Dakota hangings in December. But not to mention that also, let's talk about the harm that it's caused in celebrating Thankstaking during Native American Heritage Month. November is Native American Heritage Month.
Right.
It's just like adding insult to injury on back to back to back to things, and where people are still celebrating the holiday, still extracting from culture. Oh, by the way, it's Native American Heritage Month, but also here's Thankstaking, this holiday that started the genocide of a whole people, you know?
Right.
Or didn't start it, but like them coming over and then was made into a holiday. There's just no words.
And although I think education at this exact point in November 2024 is better than when I was younger, I think there's so much that people don't know. What you just taught me now, I know for sure. I can't think of a school where that's taught.
No.
And, you know, I'm a teacher. I always tell my students two things. Please travel the world and study history. Because they travel the world, they'll realize they have more in common with different people than different. And if they study history, they'll know things like this. Because I think a lot of leaders want to rule by fear, and they don't want people to know the truth. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Could you further define what Thankstaking means to you? Let's be really clear. Is that more of a thing that because many people are celebrating the traditional Thanksgiving, that this is of observance to clarify what really happened? Is that a good definition, or would you say that differently?
Well, there's many people that call it different things, like the day of mourning or Thankstaking, because it's called Thanksgiving. But again, no one's giving anything to anyone. It was all being taken and extracted. So that's why we have renamed it Thankstaking. There's also Truthsgiving, which is like talking about the truth of what this holiday is. So there's been a few different ways to describe it, but I believe that it's a day of all of those things, talking about the truth, being acknowledging what was taken, and taking a moment to mourn all the deaths that have happened from the time the settlers came
all
up
these things
until
we're
now.
Talking about, yeah. And is part of it trying to make sure you pass it on to the younger generation so people don't forget?
Yes. And I mean, the thing is too, is that the thing is too, is that a lot of people talk about indigenous folks like they're past tense. And they are not.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, they are not. They're still here. They're still thriving.
Right.
You know, and I think that is the biggest thing that I feel like it creates. This story of Thanksgiving creates erasure, and it creates more harm by not acknowledging the harm that was caused.
Right.
And I think people have a hard time wanting to acknowledge something that is so,
of course,
dark, and
people are uncomfortable with confrontation, but it's extremely important
how you repair and how you support these communities.
It's a reciprocity.
Yes. Going back to that reciprocity.
I had a kind of a complicated question, and hear me out. Most families I know celebrate Thanksgiving. They look at this event as a day to be thankful for each other and everything in their lives. Is there some way our country can combine this concept whilst remembering the devastation faced by thousands of Native Americans? So if we want to bring light to this, and we know that many, many families are going to get together, take time off, do you think it's possible in the future we could get to the point where they're thankful for each other, but they make sure that their kids know what really happened and the real history behind this? Could we combine both of them, or is that?
I think we have to create new traditions and new pathways in order to not have what this holiday has meant for so long.
Yeah.
to some folks, you have to create something new when something isn't working. You know, you're going to get the same result every time.
Do what people want, like a gathering time for families to be thankful on a different date. And because of the destruction and the lies that this is based upon, remember that on this day. Would that make sense? Or
I think it would be something that this would need to be decided by many different indigenous people. But I personally, in my head, I don't know how we can have a specific holiday that is, maybe it's changing the date or whatever, but still having a holiday that's based off of it was brought on through these other things. Like, I think just getting rid of the holiday completely is what is going to save a lot of harm.
Okay.
But I think there should be, just like Indigenous Peoples Day, which was considered Columbus Day here in the U.S.
That's actually what I was going to bring up next.
Yeah, I feel like we changed the holiday, and some people don't even get it off anymore. Some places are not
that
closed.
Really shocked me that when I did the research, like my school, I grew up, we had Columbus Day off, right? We just believed whatever they told us. And then when this came around, where we were recognizing what really happened, and I learned that they changed it to Indigenous People Day, then we didn't get the day off anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can have the name, but we're not going to take time to acknowledge it.
So, like, that's what I'm saying is, like, I still think that there needs to be time given to this week and to the heaviness of the day of mourning and what that is for families. But maybe it looks like everyone's showing up for Indigenous communities during that day and holding space, and people can come together with their families on a different day. But there's a week where people are just like recognizing and showing up for Indigenous peoples, because there's so over 400 years of genocide and erasure, and it's still happening today. We have missing, murdered Indigenous relatives. That's an epidemic right now that most people don't even know about. Like, just people showing up for Indigenous communities in general has been very hard. Like, not a lot of people do. And I think to have a week of people showing up for the Indigenous community, holding space, I think that is how we can create a new pathway and a new way of being, to create more community and making sure those communities thrive. And,
I think there can be a stronger focus, because I work at a charter school, and the things we celebrate, other than the typical things like Christmas and Hanukkah or Dia de los Muertos, Lunar New Year, I think people are doing a little bit better at recognizing different cultures, but I think we could definitely focus more strongly on Indigenous people and take longer and maybe expand into the arts so kids can express themselves through music and art and reflect on these things.
Yeah, music, art, and culture for sure.
Yeah. And we actually have a gardening class, so that might be really illuminating to have kids study Indigenous people's foods and how they grew things and what was important to them.
Yeah, I think organization I was a part of, we had a native plant program, because every land has their different native plants. And
can you give me one example?
We like California white sage.
Okay.
That is a plant that's native to California, that is grown here in California. Mm-hmm. And also just bringing that conversation in, white sage is going extinct because of the extraction and people wanting to, what they call saging. And that's not what it's called. It's called smudging.
Right.
And it's indigenous practice, and people have extracted and it's gotten to a point where white sage is becoming extinct because of all the extraction of like trying to extract from indigenous cultures and things. And I have a whole...
So you're saying these things are still going on?
Yes. Just like MMIW, missing, murdered Indigenous women and relatives, like all these things are still going on, and people don't even know about it. And then they want to add insult to injury with all of these.
So
like,
you're saying it's not only
Thanksgiving Day talk, like these Thanksgiving holidays, like wanting to change it and be a Friendsgiving. That's still celebrating. Like, That's why I have on my Instagram, I have multiple interviews with Indigenous people across different tribes, different generations, called Right Relations with Medicines, and talking about the extraction of medicines, which also has gone into food and extraction of different herbs and things. And all of this goes into this Thanksgiving Day talk, because this was a start of a holiday that has now moved into gluttony and like eating everything you can on that day. And like for me personally, I decided to fast on this day for all Indigenous relatives and kins that have passed on from generations previous to mine.
Right.
And not everyone does that. That was something I decided for myself, but just what this holiday represents, even Black Friday, the day after, and you're just lining up in line, everyone's pushing and shoving and hurting people to get all this stuff. Like, it all like goes into, you know, capitalism, and everything that we're experiencing today is from this one moment of colonization and the settlers coming over.
All based upon lies.
Yes, and gluttony and all of those things.
And the opposite of what the Indigenous people represent.
Yes.
So it sounds like what I was saying earlier is it's not only the lack of acknowledging what happened, but realizing a lot of these things are still taking place.
Yes.
Would that be true?
Absolutely.
And then for people that want to check out what you mentioned, what's your Instagram? How can they find you on there?
Yes, it's at Lex, Lexx, Saenz, Saenz. And I have them, if you go to like the video tab and scroll down, they're a little bit lower down, but you'll see my interviews during the pandemic for the Right Relations with Medicine series. And we talk about Palo Santo, white sage, a bunch of other different medicines too. So
people can get a little more in depth into what you're bringing up.
Yes.
The last thing I want to say about Columbus Day, when I did a little research before I talked to you, this shocked me. I mean, I've spent most of my life in New York and California, so I had no idea what was going on regarding this in other parts of the country. At least 14 states do not celebrate Columbus Day: Alaska, Hawaii, Iowa, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, Oregon, South Dakota, Vermont, Washington, Wisconsin, as well as Washington, D.C. South Dakota officially celebrates Native American Day instead. Now, what is the difference with Native American Day? Do you differentiate, or is that just another way to mention the same thing?
No, I think most people will say Indigenous now to encompass all Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. But I think some people still will say Native American.
Right. But mentioning that, I was shocked that this said at least 14 states do not celebrate. So that means there's a lot of other ones that are still going on as things have been for, what did you say, almost 200 years?
400, yeah.
400,
and
yeah.
I was here as they took down the statue of Columbus here in Los Angeles. And
when was that? I'm sorry.
I think it was back in 2018 or 19. I can't remember exactly. I think it was before the pandemic or during. It was around that time. But it was when they started changing that day, and then they started taking Columbus statues down.
Right.
And yeah, that was a very powerful moment. A lot of the Indigenous community in Los Angeles showed up, and they started doing that across Turtle Island. But there's still some states where I think they do have the statues up still. I think they're obviously, like you said, there's states that still don't celebrate it.
Right.
And then there's places here, even within the cities, that they've changed the name and everything, and they won't give people the day off.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but from my research, it looked like the point where the Indigenous people really wanted to take action and clarify what's really going on was maybe around when I was born, 1970. However, this shocked me that it wasn't until 2021 that things really started to change a little bit. Although it is not a federal holiday under U.S. law, the Biden administration has formally recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. The first White House proclamation on the holiday was released in 2021. That's pretty recent. Written with input from Indigenous activists. Although it is not a federal holiday under U.S. law, the Biden administration has formally recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. So we're getting to the point where they're recognizing, but that touches upon the point that you say, yeah, we recognize, but we're not going to take the day off. We're not going to give the strength of focus that we did to Columbus Day and Thanksgiving, but we're just going to say, yeah, we acknowledge it, but there's a long way we have to go to get to where we need to be, right?
Yeah, all of these things are like bare minimum. they're
Right.
not even, it's not even a minimum, I would say. Like, this should be Indigenous people at every table. We are still here, we're still thriving, and to not have more Indigenous people at the table of anywhere,
Right.
jobs in the White House, like
Right.
when this is their land, like that is where we need to start to make the changes.
You would think it would
like,
be imperative
forget the
because of
paper
that.
holidays and
Yeah.
all this like man-made
Yeah.
stuff since like even Thanksgiving. We need, where we're going to create the real change is like bringing these people to the table and having the real hard conversations and creating the real change that needs to be first it needs to be addressed, and
Right.
then creating the change behind it to show that we are creating space for Indigenous communities to be recognized federally. Like, that's not even a federally recognized holiday. Like,
Right.
everything needs to be recognized federally in order for it to have weight in this world, which is crazy. Like, no, we need to be able to bring our Indigenous relatives to the table and have them be a part of every aspect of what this country and this Turtle Island is, because they are the heart of the land.
We really
They
need
are.
representation.
We need representation, and we need to learn the teachings, because
Yes.
they have all the knowledge.
It needs to start in school. Kids need to grow up knowing the truth.
Absolutely.
You know, I didn't
That's
know. I don't want to go to a different topic, but you know, I grew up in upstate New York, and I had no idea till I moved here in 2013 there was an Armenian genocide. I think there's so much of history that is not included in the books even today.
Yeah.
And so kids grow up, they might just do Thanksgiving and not think of it. Oh, that's when we eat a lot of food and then we pass out.
Yeah. And I mean, we can't talk about genocide without also recognizing what's going on in Israel right now.
Absolutely.
So I just want to acknowledge that and hold space for that as well, for the Indigenous folks over there. And just because we literally, there's so many genocides happening right now.
Absolutely.
And
Beyond that. And it's just like this reoccurring nightmare that
Yes.
nobody is learning from. And to me, seems like it comes from people being greedy and selfish.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It's heavy. It's heavy. I'm getting
Yeah.
teary-eyed right now.
Yeah.
Just like, you know.
But this is
even-
why we need to talk about this.
Exactly. This is where it starts, is with the conversations,
Right.
and us educating ourselves, and, you know, not asking those people who we hurt to educate you. That is not okay.
Do you think one issue that is possibly slowing down progress is the fact that we live in a world where everybody's on a phone, everybody's in their own little bubbles? And when you say people need to get together and talk about this, I think people are in their own comfort zones, and they're learning less and less about people that are different from them.
Right. I mean, you think about TikTok and Instagram, and the algorithms are data of what you watch and what you scroll past, right? So even when you're scrolling, you're in a conducive little bubble, right? Because it's just playing the same things that they know that will keep you on longer.
It has nothing
right?
to do with reality.
Right. And so you're in a conducive bubble when you're watching these things. You're in a bubble when you're in your groups, your social groups that you're a part of. And it's like, you have to step out of that, and you have to learn, and you need to look who's at your table and who's in your setting. If you don't have any Indigenous people in your friend groups, you might need to expand. If you don't have any Black kin in your friend groups, you need to expand. Like,
God
you
forbid
need to learn.
You put your phone down and you sit at a table like we are here
And look at yourself.
with maybe 5 people that are completely different than you. And then you'll be like, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't believe that 10-second thing I saw on TikTok.
Yeah. And well, it's not even just that. I think it's like also being able to take a hard look at the internal racism that we have in this country,
right.
and looking at yourself and realizing how internalized we have taken these societal norms and things that really don't exist. That's why decolonizing and relearning is so important in order to get to a future that we want, that is based in Indigenous knowledge and reciprocity and community,
right.
and being a good relative. I think all of that is interconnected and interrelated, which is, again, an Indigenous teaching.
Right. And the fact that my podcast is called Creativity is the Cure, it's really going to take people being creative together to reimagine how we're going to make this work.
Absolutely.
All live in the same place.
Yes.
And meet the needs of, people that are very different than you. It's going to be uncomfortable for quite a while, right?
Yeah. And I think what people get caught up in is the guilt of it all.
Right.
And then they make it about them when it's like, I'm sorry, but Karen, I don't want your white woman tears. We're educating you so you can go and deal with that and learn from it and take a hard look at yourself. And I think that is what is really hard for people. They can't really listen to what people are trying to tell them and learn from it, and with other people leading other than yourself. And that also goes into white saviorism. And I think there's so many ways we could branch off of this conversation, but I think it's really important to just take a really hard look at yourself and try to learn more as much as you can, which is why they're trying to get rid of the education system, because people are starting to learn the real truths. And that's why these conversations are so important. And I have other ideas and alternatives for people. It's obviously not just having the conversations and learning history, but also, being able to acknowledge that the lands that you're on. And if you are going to learn about indigenous cultures, really getting involved with the community and
spend a day with people that are different than you.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's also about creating new traditions. You could spend that day, instead of being gluttonous and extracting traditions and food traditions from, certain things are traditional, like the Three Sisters, which is corns, beans, and squash. And there's some dishes that include those for Thankstaking, but if you're really going to do, why don't you go and actually learn about that and where that comes from? But even getting outside and maybe going on a hike for the holiday, or recognizing there's an indigenous hike group out here. I don't know if they're just open to the public or not, but there's so many ways to get involved with indigenous organizations that are doing the work to try to open things up for people to learn. And it's also learning about your privilege and not taking up space within it, and even for Thankstaking, if you are going to celebrate, which I don't think you should, but if you're going to, maybe collecting donations, doing a land acknowledgement at dinner, starting these conversations, collecting donations and giving them to the land conservancies of indigenous people that have created these conservancies.
Yes.
Donating to other indigenous-led organizations. Nonprofit that I work for, Rising Hearts, we do a Truthsgiving run, and you could do a walk, a run, bike, rollerblade, whatever. And so we do a Truthsgiving 5K every year, and it's to honor the lands that you're on, and the proceeds go to a few different indigenous organizations. But there's so many ways to get involved. But, me and my friend were talking about this the other day, is that even indigenous organizations don't get as much donations and acknowledgement and recognition as other organizations. We struggle so much harder to get donations and things.
I think you brought up a great point earlier, though. These people still exist.
Yes.
This is not some archaic thing we're trying to remember.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. And now this kind of leads into my next question. I've seen a few movies about indigenous people that were pretty well made. I think everybody knows because it came out in 2023, Killers of the Flower Moon by Martin Scorsese. I like that shined light on some very serious things that it seems like when reviews came out, people didn't know that occurred. I remember in the 90s, there was a really good movie called Black Robe, which was about all the priests coming in and trying to convert the indigenous people and all the destruction that happened. However, when I looked at all the movies and TV shows that I've seen that seem to be historical, supportive and all, they were all done by white men. So I wondered, can you recommend any TV shows, movies, or documentaries that could really inform people in a way that you believe is accurate?
Oh, there's so many. And
You got me hooked on a really good TV show.
yeah, Reservation Dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so great. If I had to name one, Indian Horse is an amazing story.
Is that recent?
It's relatively like a few years ago, I believe, but it's intense. I will give a trigger warning for it. It's very, very intense, but it needs to be watched. It's about the boarding schools,
right,
and the trauma and the resilience that came with that, because we can't talk about trauma without talking about resilience. And that's what this movie encompasses. And it's heartbreaking.
Right.
Like I had to sit there for like
I know
a while
what you're
after.
talking about, but I haven't seen that film. And you're right. It's almost unbearable.
But it's important. We have to see, like, we have to understand the history and what happened, the truth of what happened.
Right.
And Indian Horse did a beautiful way of showcasing that. But yeah, it is very heartbreaking.
So
for
that's
sure.
what you recommend. Okay. As we get toward the end of this discussion, I always like to say some quotes, and I'd like to hear your response. The first one was by Chief White Eagle Ponca. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. When you are in doubt, be still and wait. When doubt no longer exists for you, then go forward with courage. How would you relate to that with what we're talking about today?
Yeah, that's a powerful one. And Ponca is a tribe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think, it's you're taught in these ways to like clear your mind and come from a place of good and calm. And I think that's very hard in this day and age, right? Because there's so much going on. But the more you can find ways to regulate and calm, and what was the word he used to move forward?
Go forward with courage.
Lose the doubt and go forward with courage, right?
When doubt no longer exists.
When doubt no longer exists. And I think in order to get rid of that doubt, you have to calm the mind, calm the body. And that's that way of regulating. The way we regulate most of what I talk with people is going outside. We are related to everything in nature, and calming the mind to be able to move forward with courage is so important. And I think that it's really hard to do that in this day and age, but when we can find those ways, when we can find those ways of regulating, we're going to be able to move forward with courage. And I've found in my most trying times, when I am able to calm the mind as best as I can, I'm able to move forward and take courage.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. The next quote is by Chief Joseph Nez Perce, and he said, "We do not want churches because they will teach us to quarrel with God, as the Catholic and Protestants do. We do not want to learn that."
Yeah.
I almost want to read it again.
Okay,
because
go
it's
ahead.
a very short sentence, but the more times I read it, it's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
We do not want churches because they will teach us to quarrel with God, as the Catholic and Protestants do. We do not want to learn that. And, I also have to tell you that I was a minister for 10 years.
Oh,
So for me, I'm seeing another side of this, but I have to force myself to look at somebody who is different than me and what their intentions are, what their beliefs, and what's important to them. Mm-hmm. I think people get caught up in, here's my agenda.
Absolutely.
So what's your perspective on that?
I grew up in the church, and it was always really hard for me, and I didn't really understand why.
What type of church did you go to?
Catholic and Christian churches.
Okay.
And it was always
That's pretty complicated and complex stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And because those were the boarding schools that, our ancestors were sent to. And I don't know, just learning about the boarding schools and what Christianity did to people that weren't like them and killed them and raped them and so many things.
In the name
if you
of
look
God.
In the name of God that is something that is man created.
What do you think that he meant when he said, we don't want to do this because they will teach us to quarrel with God? That statement really struck me. And I guess I'm curious, what's your perspective as an Indigenous person? What would the relationship with God be instead of quarreling?
I mean, we're taught that Creator is in everything, is in us, is in every planet, every human being, every plant, every animal. And it's in how you treat yourself and how you treat others. And that's where that reciprocity comes in.
So quarreling or arguing would be ridiculous, and it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, no. And I think in any religious culture, there's constant arguing of like fighting to, this is the way, the right way. And in indigenous practices and cultures, it's the only way. It's creator is in everything.
Well, spirit is in everything.
Yeah.
So yeah. Why would you single out?
And why, like, there's nothing to argue about.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was
trying to get to. Yeah. And I just feel like once you realize and honor everything as that, as such, and give that honor, respect, truth and honesty and love into those things, there's no room for argument, because there's truth and honesty in everything. And there's truth and honesty in a plant, just being a plant.
Right.
And there's truth and honesty
even
in
science.
us.
Science is teaching us that
Yeah.
too.
And there's even truth and honesty in us just being us, but we don't even know how to do that anymore. You know,
Right.
like, I mean, this could go in so many directions,
I know.
but I feel like that was a pretty good.
I think you answered it really well. And it's funny, this leads right into the last quote. Chief Seattle said this: "Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to this web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect."
Yeah, and we talked about that even in the last podcast interview. We say all my relations, which means I'm connected to everything that I am related to.
Yeah.
And that's how we end prayer. And it's that interconnectedness of everything. And that's why you can't just talk about one thing without at least acknowledging another, because everything is interconnected. And
You
I
can't
think
separate them
right
by nature.
And that's the thing, is that like with all these movements and all these different problems and things, people continue to separate. We can't. It's all interconnected. And I think that that's something that is an indigenous teaching of everything is related. We are all related.
Right. Can I ask you, from your background and everything that you've learned in this last decade, can you tell me what you're thankful for in your life?
Oh,
In honor of an acknowledgement of thanks-taking or truth-giving.
I don't even want to say what I'm thankful for, because I don't want to give anything to this holiday.
Right.
Like I'm thankful every day. It doesn't need to be a holiday for me to be thankful. And you know, I just even like wanting to know like what we're thankful for, like around this time, just really just kind of irks me.
It's almost like a flip side of the quarrel with God, right?
Yeah, it just is like
everything is all interconnected.
I don't even want to acknowledge what I'm thankful for at this point, because you know, I am so upset and I'm so angry and I'm so saddened by what has happened to indigenous people across the world. There is like, yes, there is so much to be thankful for, but there is also so much that is covered by being thankful.
Right. And that frame of mind is almost eclipsing what we must acknowledge.
Yes. And so I will say this, is that I would like to sit here and recognize all of the indigenous people across the world and the struggles and the trauma and also the resiliency that those folks go through. And I want to just honestly put my energy and love towards them and all of because it takes to be a good relative and to be in good kinship is to acknowledge and show up and support those communities. And I think that we can't really sit here and talk about what we're thankful for. We need to just put action behind our words. We need to learn. We need to put action. Yeah. For me, like there's a lot to be thankful for, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
I think you brought up a great point. We need to stop talking about this. We need to take action.
Yeah. We need to acknowledge. We need to learn, acknowledge, and take action. And that's what I would say needs to happen. That's how I think we should end the podcast, is doing a call out to folks to make sure that they are doing those three things.
I think you're right, but I had one thing to add. You said that when you get together with your indigenous friends, you often have prayers. Could you offer a prayer to end this with?
Yeah, I can do that. You know, sometimes we sing songs, sometimes we just talk And that is the prayer. We'll sit there in silence. That is the prayer. We'll light our medicines. But today I will say one. So, well, Creator, thank you so much for just allowing folks to hear this conversation. I want to thank you for the sacred elements, the sun, the moon, the stars, the plants, the water, the animals, the four-legged, the two-legged, the animals in the ocean, the animals in the ground, the animals in the sky, our winged ones. We want to thank you for the fire, the four directions, our ancestors, our future generations. Creator, we pray for 7 generations before us and 7 generations after us. And we ask you to continue to help us to support those generations before and after us and the planet and those sacred elements. We ask you to protect us and our families, give good health and help them along their journeys, give us good teachings, and help us to learn and see things for what they truly are, Creator. And we ask you to bring us good health and help us to find happiness and joy while doing the work that needs to be done. Aho mataku yoyo yasa in all my relations.
Alexis, Saenz, thank you so much for talking to me. Always good to talk to you, and I hope we can investigate more stuff in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I'll see you at Pilates.
You're not alone, it's okay. Even when you lose your way, you have purpose, remember, don't forget who you are. We are here, it's okay. No, they cannot erase. We are the ancestors, resilient, don't forget who we are. We can't forget all we are and who our Creator is. We can't forget where we come from and whose land this is. It's okay, they are here, we are here, it's alright, we are not giving up the fight. It's okay, it's the process, remember who you are. We are ourselves, holy. We can live harmoniously. We are the 7th generation. Don't forget who you are. We stand tall, no fear. We are always here with you. You are walking in our footsteps. Don't forget who you are. We can't forget all we are and who our Creator is. We can't forget where we come from and whose land this is. It's okay, they are here, we are here, it's alright, we are not giving up the fight. It's okay, it's the process, remember who you are. It's okay, they are here, we are here, it's alright, we are not giving up the fight. It's okay, it's the process, remember who you are.